Sacred attention therapy is an approach to liberation. The first liberation is from the conditioned self, psychology of early life. The second liberation is from the realization of the true nature, the fulfillment of oneself as a personality. And the third liberation is the liberation into the life of spirituality and spiritual practice. Sacred attention therapy, or SAT, is a meta-psychology because it embraces not only the physical, emotional, mental and energetic aspects of the human being, but also the spiritual and the transcendental. Therefore, it is uniquely placed to be an applied psychology through counselling and psychotherapy in the 21st century, in which human beings are more complex than ever before.
Welcome to the 10th in a series of online interviews with Richard Harvey. My name is Rob Meager. Today's interview will discuss the lecture Awareness, the Expression of Your True Nature from the Novena Teachings lecture series. This lecture is available in written form in Moksha Dawn, an ebook you can order from the books page of the Sacred Attention Therapy website. You can listen to the full recording of many of these lectures on the lectures page. And lastly, you can view many other videos on the videos page of the Sacred Attention Therapy website. The URL for our website is www.sacredattentiontherapy.com. And on our website, you can click on the YouTube channel icon to view the videos on our YouTube channel. A little bit of background about Richard Harvey. Richard is a psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He's the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a three-stage model of human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and The Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all around the world, and his forthcoming book is entitled Your Sacred Calling. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Richard to the call. Good to be with you, Richard.
Hello, Robert. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you. Awareness, the expression of your true nature. And Richard, near the beginning of this lecture, you make an interesting statement, very brief, but very interesting. You say, quote, "The loss of awareness is the loss of innocence." Now, to bring back, if needed, to jog your memory about the context within the lecture, you started talking about children being aware naturally. And then when they lose their awareness as they grow into adolescence, adulthood, so does that awareness become reduced. But the opening statement, the loss of awareness is the loss of innocence. What did you mean by the loss of awareness is the loss of innocence?
Well, I think primarily to evoke the nature of the first few years of life which are chiefly involved perhaps with two essentials, and one is survival and one is identity. Really, of course, they're intermeshed. And insofar as by the time we reach 5, 6, 7, this kind of stage, an identity has been formed, so we have fallen out of the spatial awareness of non-differentiation with other beings, with other objects, with life itself. So as I often say, find yourself a 3-year-old, if you can, go play with them. Go to the beach, go into the countryside, go down, crawl around, be in their level, and enjoy that experience. Have that experience for a few hours and see the world through the eyes of the 3-year-old. Now, contrast that, if you can, with the experience of the 4 or the 5-year-old. It's entirely different. And if you were to try and describe it, it would be the experience of non-differentiation and the experience of differentiation, separation and division, because as we're moving toward 5, so we're beginning to separate objects out in a way that we no longer feel continuous with them. And of course, by the time we're 7, 8, that process is entirely relinquished any sense of our freedom in our continuity with the rest of life itself. In other words, we're established in a separative identity. There's this I sense. And our I sense, which we could have and would be blessed to have, and we hope that at some point in the future humanity grows up enough and is aware enough and intelligent enough to realize that the I sense doesn't have to mean it's us and them. Or it's me against the world, or it's a struggle, or can I get my needs met from you, or whatever, and or any of these terrible things which result in all kinds of violence between human beings, ultimately. So as we become identified with separative identities, so awareness falls away, of course, because the truth is not separation, it's not division, and it's not self-identification. An I sense does not presuppose separation. However, in our culture at present, that's the way in which it's modeled for us. Therefore, it's the way in which we attain the I sense. Therefore, it's the way in which we lose our naturalness. And again, our naturalness could be equated with awareness.
An equally interesting comment you go on to share, and again quote, people mostly are not aware. It is one of the sacred spiritual practices that we are losing in the world today. And what I wanted to ask you, again, I'll reread that quote, people mostly are not aware. It is one of the sacred spiritual practices that we are losing in the world today. Are there levels of awareness, Richard? Or is it black and white? You're either asleep or you're awake?
Two things there, I think. Firstly, yes, of course, there's levels of awareness, and that's very important to us, I think, in receiving people, understanding people, communicating with people, because there's nothing more futile than trying to communicate to people in a level of awareness that they're not participating in. So insofar as we're sensitive in relationship and communication, we perhaps intuitively, and let's say as counselors, as therapists, we quite meaningfully want to intuit, feel, know what the level of awareness the people we're communicating with is very, very, very important. I wouldn't equate this to the second part of the question, which is awakening. In one sense, awakening is or it isn't. But it really, I wouldn't say that it's about levels as such, so much as a process of awareness events, really, for most of us. in which these events, which, so to speak, open our eyes, are not, I suggest, gradual or incremental, but in fact each one of them is total. Now, you may require 3 or 2 or 1 or none or 10. You may not listen even if you have 20, but according to our individual potential and capacity, there is a certain number, a certain intensity of events of awakening that need to take place in order for us to return to awareness, as it were. It's one way of looking at it, or to reignite awareness in the latter years.
Why is awareness a courageous act then? Because you share in the lecture just that awareness is a courageous act.
You don't shy away, mostly when you're with people, should we say, in the social context. For example, one of the reasons that I think you and I have discussed this to some degree before, and certainly I have with many other people, I imagine you have too, it seems to be a telling sign of the spiritual, and for some time, not all the time, but for some time, interned spiritual individual, that we lose some interest, shall we say, in the outside, perhaps in movies, perhaps in drinking or party going, or even holidays, traveling, sightseeing, all these normal, usual kind of activities, and they pale for us, and we turn in, and I suggest one of the reasons that they pale is there is a cohesion amongst the people who participate in all of these things, return from holidays to tell us how wonderful it is, and often as spiritual people we're not truly excited. We might try and meet them on some level about that, but we don't necessarily want to go to Italy or want to go on a cruise or something. I remember when I was in India, I had a few hundred pounds left, and somebody said, join me on a trip, we'll go to the Taj Mahal and the something or other, wonders of the world, and wonderful trip. And I thought about it, and I said, I got to tell you, I'm not coming. I'm going to stay here and meditate in the ashram. And there's a life choice. And as I've got to know myself better, because I was only in my 20s then, that is my life choice. I've always been that way inclined. I remain that way inclined. It's a spiritual internness in which you feel, in a sense, that the world is within you, and also that you don't wish to participate in the superficiality of those people who are fascinated and entranced with the outside, and also colluding by not seeing much that's going on. And when you start getting into that collusion of, I'm not really seeing this, or I'm not really seeing this, or I'm not really seeing this, it starts fairly innocuously. Then, of course, it escalates into great seriousness. So we go from something that may happen in a family dynamic, for example, where you would say, oh, not you, but somebody might say, oh, it's just a joke, I don't really mean it. You know how serious that can be for the individuals on the receiving end, but nonetheless the collusion is, it's just a joke, we don't really mean it, to atrocities going on in the present day world, which again we want to turn away from, of course, and we want to turn away from how any of those things came about. So awareness is a courageous act, because it's not only is it your true nature, but it's as if you keep the beam on, the beam of seeing, regardless of how difficult, challenging or horrendous it may be what you see. All beautiful and pleasurable and wonderful, by the way.
One of the things I'm hearing that you're sharing is, as our awareness grows, so does our discernment about what works for us. Now, discernment being different from judgment. If it doesn't work for us, it doesn't work for us. If it works for someone else, that's fine. But what I'm what I'm hearing in part is that growing awareness invites a growing discernment about what works for us and what doesn't.
We've talked through these lectures and progressively, and during these last 3 years with the whole set of lectures, the clarity about potential capacity and destiny came to me as we went on. And it punctuates the lectures, I think, as I recall. And it is that in awareness, which depends, of course, on knowing oneself, so it differentiates somewhat between childhood natural state of awareness and adulthood natural state of awareness, because here we look at ourselves in our tendencies and our aspirations, and we may think ahead of ourselves, of course, and we may think ourselves into a state in which we're not, which is why it's tremendously important to be able to clearly and objectively look inside yourself to see what sort of a being, or as I say sometimes, what sort of a flower is this? What is it? What is this blossoming into? What am I? What is my potential? What is my capacity? So how big may that potential, small or medium size, be expressed, be demonstrated in the life? And what ultimately is the destiny? And all of these things, I suggest, may be an unpopular idea, utterly fixed, utterly set. Your freedom doesn't lie in changing one iota or anything that's going to happen to you. Your freedom lies in the way in which you meet what happens to you.
In talking about how modern day society has become unaware, you state in your lecture that, quote, the previous generations turned off, became other than present and preoccupied to an extreme degree. And my question, perhaps a comment that I'd appreciate your insight to, is aren't we, society today, still turned off?
Yeah, of course we are, and we're turned off to a tremendous degree, and it's what we challenge in a sense as spiritual teachers or spiritual aware people or counselors, mentors and so forth. Is what we challenge in people, because we know how tremendously crucial it is. But I consider, and again this is something that came up through the 3 years of delivering all of these lectures, was the tremendous influence for us of the 20th century, which may seem obvious and self-evident in a way. But I think the more you review and consider the progress of time through the 18th and 19th century, sociologically, internationally, ecologically, certainly to do with war science, of course, and advances in technology, the more you can see the isolation, the alienation, and the violent dynamics of the 20th century, which in some senses have given birth to us here at the beginning of the 21st century, which we can hope and have faith could be a time of spiritual liberation, because there's no other kind of liberation that's going to make it. It certainly isn't political. It certainly isn't psychological per se, or at least that's not enough. It needs to be a quantum leap into love, because what's appearing in our world is so apparently devoid of love. Of course, we need to bring love to it to heal it. And by the way, having said that, and again, I'm sure highly controversial, I don't think anybody does anything out of not love. It's just, there's just an ignorance of what love really is. And unless we can bring, I mean, we've had a recent event in which, as usual, the politicians have responded. These are apparently people who lead us in and stand for us. They certainly don't stand for me. The idea that you will reply in kind to tremendous violence is of course going to take us further and further into darkness if we need or can even tolerate going any further into darkness. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had one politician who would stand and say, well, I will not retaliate. I'm that powerfully strong. I'm that full of love that retaliation isn't part of it.
It reminds me of the teaching, and I believe I've heard it from Gandhi, but others may have shared it also. Hate is not overcome by hate. Hate is only overcome by love. Challenging times, and challenging times in particular to practice such teachings in the face of such adversity, but that's what it will require.
And everybody can do something about it. That's what's wonderful, I think, and the blessing of the individual life is that absolutely there isn't one of us who is disempowered as such. You're not disempowered in this, because go deeply inside yourself and find that not love, if you will, and heal it with love, of course. It's complex, but it's also simple, and it directs everybody into themselves, of course.
Now you finally get to the all-important question in the lecture of what is awareness. And so I want to ask in this setting, for those listening and watching, what is awareness, Richard?
I do answer it somewhere in the lecture, don't I?
Yes.
Awareness is our natural state, but awareness, I will tend to use it in the sense of the individual adaptive organisms practicing of consciousness. Consciousness then is universal. It's in which we are all combined together into unity, and through awareness we practice individually that aspect or that ray of consciousness through which that can come through us. And so therefore you and I are not only the total consciousness, but we are in practice, as we meet in seeming separation, so to speak, shards of the sun. So if the sun stands for consciousness, then each individual person through awareness is a shard or a ray of light. And that's what we are. We're light. We're consciousness. But in the physical sense, of course, light equates with what in the spiritual realm we refer to as consciousness or God. So really in awareness what we're doing is expressing God. We're surrendering to God. There's many different ways of saying and putting it, of course. But the closest we can be to God is by being aware.
It's interesting you bring up this term God, because there's a very interesting and telling quote from your lecture. You share it as follows: God has been anthropomorphized, made into an image of a human. It is, of course, totally ridiculous. God is not a man. Man is not a God. Human beings are God beings. We are ourselves divine. A question, equally, again, a statement. How as society did we get it so wrong? How did our anthropomorphizing of God achieve such a deep-rooted status?
So-called God, by which I mean the scriptural God, is clearly, I think, a projection of the psychological condition of humanity in any given age, in any given state. So to understand something of Hindu psychology, look at the pantheon of gods. To understand something of, let's say, the Jewish nations in relationship to the psychology of thousands of years ago, look at the Old Testament. And we get some sense of what, because of what is projected as the divine emotional, mental, psychological state, we really get some idea of what it was like to be one of these nationalities, in these tribes, in these conditions, in those times. It says, of course, a great deal more about the people involved than it does say anything whatsoever about God. God is the numinous. Clearly in the Old Testament, for example, we have the wonderful and transparently spiritual meeting of Moses with the divine, in which the answer is, I have no name, and then when pressed, it is I am. And suddenly, of course, we're in Brahman. We're over the other side of the world with this idea of I am, or the being state, being the totality, the divine, the sense in which the individual person and God are the same, of course. The idea is I am, and that's it. I have no name. I simply am. And so we can all say that, but not when, and this is the issue about people are God or I am God or any of these other absurdities, is God is when I am not, which means I am, not I am Richard, or I am Robert, I am whoever, but just but simply the divine. And that's what I call, not I, but I like, and I've adopted the term the divine person. All of us participate in the divine person. And that kind of reminds me, or reminds us, that it's a grounded event, it's a real event, it is, it's specific and clear in the divine realm, the divine person of which we're all, you could say, a part, or perhaps better put, you are all of it already. We are all of it already, each one of us. And that's a difficult thing to grasp, but from the point of view of the spiritual realms, from the divine domain, that of course, which is not a relative truth, makes perfect sense. You're not a part of God. So long as you're out of the way, I am.
I want to get one last question in to end off the interview. Near the end of the lecture, you say awareness, like compassion, is a practice until it takes us over. Awareness, like compassion, is a practice until it takes us over. Question is meditation the only way to practice awareness?
Well, meditation is awareness in essence. So then again, meditation is confused usually with the outward form. So very much in the same way as Buddhism revised Hinduism on the basic objection that people were doing things without understanding their inward meaning. And so therefore the Buddha, perhaps, or one way of putting it would be to say, took away these outward forms in some ways and made it very simple. In very much the same way, when we think of meditation and all the different methods, strip it all down, it comes down to awareness, simply being or I am. Hence my idea of the consciousness exercise, a short exercise in which all of the aspirations of thousands of meditative methods over thousands of years is crystallized into one short exercise which returns you to the central place of being. That's the idea of the consciousness exercise. But I would say that so many of us in the West, unlike the East, where meditation may be saturated through the culture, we need to know how to meditate driving the car, eating the breakfast, if you're inclined, smoking the cigarette, drinking the beer in the bar, and certainly with your loved ones and your friends. There's certainly those times when, of course, you're propelled into reaction. We need to know how to do it then. Therefore, there's a danger in so-called meditation in the Western-orientated cultures, which is that it becomes a sort of activity I do for half an hour, and the 23 and a half hours of the day I'm not really meditating. So meditation's up for grabs, really, and I think we have to look further into it and realize that interning is not in and of itself the spiritual practice. It's a stage. We all need to stop at some point when we've been so out there, but in order to realign. The spiritual person doesn't close his eyes to the world.
And yet it's a nice way to come into awareness. I'll leave it at that today, Richard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye, Robert.